Good afternoon, everyone. As you start to come into our session today, thank you so much for allocating what might be your lunch break, but an hour of your time. We'll just give a couple of minutes for everybody to start coming into the room, and we'll then get cracking from then on. So thank you again for joining. We'll just give it a couple of minutes. Welcome to everybody that's coming through, getting up in numbers now, which is exciting. Thank you so much. Excellent. So we've got a minute here, and then we'll get into our event for today. I hope everyone's week is going swimmingly well. Great. Thank you very much. What are we up to here? Yeah, up to about 60. That's great. Okay, I might get started. So hello and welcome everyone that's joining us today, either live or looking at the recording, and welcome to our webinar on behaviour change for 2024. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. And as many of you may know, my name is Dr. Nicole Garofano, and I'm the Head of Circular Economy Development for Planet Ark. And I have the privilege of leading the team for the Australian Circular Economy Hub, or the ACE Hub. The ACE Hub proudly acknowledges our program establishment partners, the Australian Government, our founding partners, KPMG and Alexis Energy, and also our official sponsor, Bingo Industries. And really our mission of the ACE Hub is to facilitate the transition towards a circular economy in Australia by providing the national reference platform for circular economy knowledge and collaboration. And of course, today's example today's event is an example of that. But before we start, of course, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all calling in from today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm grateful to be joining from the lands of the Jagera and Turrbal peoples in the Anagen, and welcome to all of you from all of your lands across the country and beyond, perhaps. So today we're excited to be hosting this webinar, which we've called Successfully Driving Transformation, Behaviour Change and the Circular Economy. We know that behaviour change is such an important mechanism in order to create a sustained systemic change. And so we're really excited to be bringing this topic to you. For this event, I'm joined by my colleague, Ryan Collins, who's the Head of Impact and Research at Planet Ark, and Jennifer Macklin, who's the Senior Researcher and Circular Economy Lead at BehaviourWorks Australia. I'll do a proper introduction to both of those shortly, but just a little bit of housekeeping just to keep us on track. So just remember to select Gallery View in the top corner of your screen so you can see everyone, particularly when we're having our discussion sessions shortly. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, we invite you to use the Q&A function for that. We won't be using the chat function for this event, but Q&A, feel free to drop your questions in there. All of our questions will be recorded, so if we don't get the chance to get to everyone today, we will be attempting to provide some grouped responses with our email that we'll send out next week. Of course, with the recording, there'll be other links as well that are relevant to today's discussion. If you do get the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. And as I said, that will come out to you in an email with a roundup and a summary of key points and questions sometime in the next week. Okay, so we've got a lot to cover in this 60 minutes and some interactivity as well. So hopefully you'll be able to participate in that. So as I mentioned today, we are joined by Ryan and Jenny, and I'll invite you to connect with Ryan and Jenny on LinkedIn, where you'll find their full bios if you're not already connected. But a very quick summary, Ryan Collins, as I mentioned, is the Head of Impact and Research for Planet Ark. He's responsible for integrating applicable research around circular economy and behaviour change science across all of Planet Ark's campaigns, and there's lots of them, planetark.org if you want to get the full list. With a background in psychology and environmental management, Ryan's role at Planet Ark since 2012 has focused on delivering behaviour change campaigns and research that helps individuals, businesses, governments, and schools to transition towards a circular economy. Jenny Macklin is the Circular Economy Lead at BehaviourWorks. She is a senior researcher with 15 years of experience in applied behaviour and systems change research to develop effective policies and programs for households, organisations, and importantly, which is really critical for the circular economy, system-wide change towards more circular futures. So welcome to you both, and I know you'll both be popping up shortly on screen. It's wonderful, and we're so grateful that you're able to join us today. So during the webinar, we'll explore pivotal roles in catalysing sustainable change, focusing on recent research by BehaviourWorks Australia that has assessed the most impactful actions that individuals and organisations can take. So Jenny will present on this crucial connection between individual and organisational behaviour change, which we'll do some activity on. And she'll also introduce this concept of behavioural system mapping. So this really helps to identify who needs to be involved and how change can be made in a complex system. Ryan's going to share with us some case studies of how the ACE Hub and broader Planet Ark programs adopt behaviour change, behavioural science, with individual and organisational outcomes to support what sort of actions we hope to achieve to create positive environmental solutions. So we have a full schedule. I'll get off screen and welcome Jenny to get into her presentation and get us kicked off for today. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks everyone for joining. It's really exciting to be here. I'd like to also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of where I'm joining from, the Darrell speaking people. As Nicole said, this is really an exciting piece of research for BehaviourWorks to be able to share. BehaviourWorks is a behavioural science organisation, but what we've really done is sort of stretched into an interdisciplinary approach and actually involved systems thinking and systems approaches into our behavioural change piece of work around the circular economy. And the combination of the two, of the behaviour change and the systems change, has really elevated the conversations that we can now have about where change needs to happen and how we can go about creating that change. So for those of you who don't know BehaviourWorks, we're a research centre that's part of Monash University in Melbourne. I'm based in Sydney, but the rest of my colleagues are down in Melbourne. We do ongoing research partnerships, with particularly like around state and federal government. We do individual behaviour science projects and a lot of education and training and capacity building. We work across a whole range of areas, but my particular area is consumption, waste and circular economy. And we say that the thing around behavioural science is that there's no magic pill or silver bullet, a magic wand for behaviour change, but by applying behavioural science processes to a particular problem, we can increase the odds of success, the odds of getting the change that you want, the extent of the change that you want, and at the scale across your audience that you want. So today, I'm going to try and pack a really large piece of work down into 15 minutes in a way that's actually going to be valuable and useful for you to walk away knowing that there's actually work that you can do regardless of your situation. So if you're an organisation that is actually trying to adopt circular economy for yourself, if you play a behaviour change process and actually a behaviour change role, trying to change the behaviour of individuals or organisations, if you have more of an advocacy or even policy making role, hopefully you will get something out of this piece of work. But particularly for today, focusing on highlighting kind of the extensive work that we've done and how we've sort of combined the behavioural science with systems thinking, setting out the clear priorities that were identified through our research for both immediate behaviour change efforts, but also the longer term policy and system change that are needed, as well as Nicole said, in an interactive part of today, actually demonstrating how the behavioural systems map that we've produced can actually be used by anyone to do your own exploration of circular economy and any particular part of that you're trying to play in or to make a change in. So firstly, just to give a bit of background behind the recommendations that I'll be sharing. This the behavioural roadmap came out of an extensive program of work, in fact, a number of parallel pieces of work. The first of which was for the Victorian government as a piece of work that they wanted to support the Recycling Victoria circular economy policy. And this involved a little bit of consultation with our then consortium of partners across the Australian, Victorian and New South Wales government, as well as key stakeholders within the Victorian government, to really identify a whole range of behaviours across individual households, organisations, councils and state government that can actually help reduce the production of waste, the generation of waste within a circular economy. We then did a similar piece of work extending that out to a national level on behalf of the Australian government as part of actually trying to develop some guidelines around measuring waste prevention. But again, this really involved a much more extensive stakeholder engagement to confirm that range of behaviours. What types of things do we actually need individuals to do, organisations and businesses, governments to do in order for the overall use of resources and disposal of those resources to be reduced in Australia. And at the same time, we were working with our government partners at the time to actually look at, how can behavioural science actually help to reduce material footprint of consumption in Australia. And that had a whole series of pieces of work that were actually looking again at that scoping level of what's everything that needs to change, trying to narrow down to a particular space, actually testing some interventions. And so the behavioural roadmap actually draws together learnings from all of these pieces of work together. And the starting point for any behaviour change project, if you ask a behavioural scientist, is to identify the behaviours that you actually want to achieve. And we did this as part of the work that we identified there was kind of 8 core circular consumption behaviours or behaviours of consumers in a circular economy. And these were the 8 that we came up with. So making do without or with less, so kind of avoiding the use of resources, borrowing instead of buying, getting items secondhand instead of buying new, buying items that built to last or are made from circular materials, continuing to use and reuse items, repairing items, and passing on or back when those items are no longer wanted. And we did go down into a great level of detail about what actions are actually required, both of individual consumers in their kind of personal spheres, but also organisations as consumers, because we know that there's a lot of focus on businesses as producers in a circular economy, but businesses and other organisations are actually a large consumer of resources in going about their day-to-day work. One of the things that was clear is that the stakeholders that we engaged did know a lot more about the behaviours of individuals in their personal sphere, and a little bit less around how organisations can actually be reducing their own consumption. And so a key recommendation was actually the need to further understand how organisational consumers should contribute. So the next stage focuses more on individual consumers, and we'll come back to organisations a little bit later on. So with our 8 behaviours, where we brought in systems thinking was really to actually understand the connections and the influences between different behaviours and later between different actors in the system. So we actually looked at these 8 behaviours as a starting point, and we said, how do these relate to each other? And what was clear from our stakeholders was that there were strong dependencies between some of these behaviours. So if we want consumers to actually make do without using a product, what that actually means typically is that they need to continue using products that they already have. But in order for them to continue using products, they need to have bought products that are actually going to last long enough to get these multiple uses out. In addition, if they want to keep using those products, they're probably going to have to repair those products at different times to get the maximum length out of their, the maximum lifetime out of their products. But again, that means when purchasing them, they need to have purchased items that were actually repairable, so designed to be repaired. When we look to borrow rent, what we realised is that this is a pretty independent behaviour. It doesn't actually depend on the consumer having done anything else prior to that. they can actually just say, oh, I need a product, I'm going to go out and borrow it. For sourcing secondhand, it's kind of similar. No, the consumer doesn't need to have gone and done anything before they can buy secondhand. But what we realized was that other consumers have a role to play in this, because if other consumers aren't passing on items that they don't want anymore, then there are no items to be purchased secondhand. And for consumers to be able to pass on items, again, they need to have bought products whose value is going to last over a long time so that they can use the product. And when they're done, there's still value in the product that makes it worthwhile to someone else sourcing that item secondhand. But we also know that this is a bit of a cyclical relationship. So not only do people need to pass on items in order for a consumer to buy it secondhand, but consumers need to be willing to buy secondhand in order for people to pass on items. So this is what we call a virtuous cycle, where the more people who want to buy, the more people who are willing to pass on, which means the more people who are able to buy. And so these actually reinforce each other. Our final behaviour was buying items made with circular materials. And again, this doesn't directly depend on the behaviours, on any behaviour by the consumer first. And so when we look at this connection between these behaviours, if what we really want to do is reduce Australia's material footprint, what using this systems approach to understand how these different behaviours actually relate is that we can see that there's actually a really obvious place to start in this system if we want to get change. If we actually enable consumers to buy items that are built to last, this will actually flow through so that they can keep using those items, they can repair those items, and they can pass those items on to other consumers. And that will flow through to those kind of final behaviours that we're looking at that directly reduce Australia's material footprint, which is making do without and sourcing items secondhand. And so applying systems principles actually says, in this case, let's start right at the beginning. What's the first part of this chain of behaviours that we want to intervene at? But another thing of systems thinking says that getting that really fundamental change can be challenging. Another way you can do is actually look at which behaviours are not dependent on other parts of the system, which behaviours are actually independent. And when we look at that, we can see that these are the two behaviours that for an individual, they don't need to have done anything else before they can do these behaviours. But our systems thinking still helps us understand, again, the relationships more broadly between these and between our goal of systems transformation. For example, sourcing items secondhand actually challenges norms of ownership, norms of the fact that items need to be new, that's somehow related to value or cleanliness. Borrowing secondhand challenges the norm of ownership overall, that you don't even need to own an item in order to get the outcome from that item that you want. And borrowing actually has a nice reciprocal relationship with making do. If you decide not to buy an item, but instead borrow it when you need it, that actually allows you to be able to next time decide to make do without it. So the good example is GoGet. If you decide not to buy a car and you sign up to GoGet, each time you need to make a trip somewhere, you can decide, are you going to borrow the GoGet car to make your trip via a private vehicle? Or will you actually make do without a car altogether and perhaps use some form of active or public transport? And so these behaviours actually reinforce each other. The same is not true for buying secondhand, because once you buy an item, then there's no need to make do without it. And so you are still actually accumulating accumulating products in your house. And that is another downside of buying secondhand. One of the things our stakeholders told us is that if you promote buying items secondhand, what you can do is find people who really like the idea that these are cheaper than other items, and it means they can actually buy more stuff, which is kind of, the opposite of what we're trying to do, which is to make do with less. And so when we look at these behaviours together, we can see that there is potentially a little bit of a hierarchy, and that perhaps if we could get people to borrow instead of buy, that has slightly more system transformation potential than buying secondhand. All of this is in the report. If I'm going a little bit fast, I'm just, as I said, trying to pack a lot into this session. But what this piece of work that we did really enabled us to do was set some clear priorities. I've looked at the consumer side of things, and when we did that, we realised that there was two clear recommendations for behaviour change. actually focusing on getting individuals and organisations to borrow instead of buy, and expanding current efforts to mainstream buying secondhand instead of buying new. So we don't just want people to buy as much secondhand as they can, but when they were considering buying something new, if instead they bought secondhand, that's the outcome that we want. We did also look at broader policy and system change, and to do that, we actually needed to understand the whole system of stakeholders and behaviours. So we looked at who else was involved. Before, we were just looking at the relationship between what a consumer can do, but there are obviously other players. For example, if a consumer wants to borrow an item, obviously a retailer needs to actually be hiring or leasing that item, so they need to maintain ownership of the item. If consumers want to buy items secondhand at scale, and at the moment peer-to-peer isn't at scale, we actually need retailers to be also selling secondhand items. And at the moment, we heard from stakeholders that there are a number of different ways that you can do this presently. They may not be mainstream, but they do exist, at least in certain product categories. For buying items built to last, which was kind of that fundamental starting place, we obviously need retailers to sell items built to last, but that depends on producers making items built to last. And what we heard was that actually at the moment, there are very few options available to buy items that are explicitly built to last at reasonable prices. And that actually getting businesses to do this is actually quite challenging because it requires an entire shift in business models around actually selling less rather than selling more. And that businesses aren't actually confident that if they make these products that consumers are willing to actually spend a little bit more in getting that higher quality. So we took all of our actors, and what we did was we actually identified that across all of those 8 core behaviours, underpinning that were actions from all of these different players in the system, and in fact over 130 different actors, different behaviours across these actors. So we actually put these into a system map, and we mapped the connections between all of these individual behaviours of all of these actors and our 8 core consumer behaviours. And our map actually allows you to zoom in onto any particular part of the system to see who is involved in what, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. But what that allowed us to do then was to actually, again, think about, well, where in this broad system do we want to intervene if we want to get that sort of broader change, that transformation of our current linear economy to a circular economy? And using the metrics in the mapping tool, what it actually identified was sort of a range of behaviours that have a particularly high level of system influence. That means if they were to occur, the number of other parts in the system that were likely to change as well over some unspecified time. These are the 10 that actually had the highest influence. And right at the top was a behaviour around governments mandating minimum design and import standards for products around minimum product lifetimes. And what we realised is that this one behaviour flows through to enough parts of the system that it actually supports 7 of our 8 behaviours. And so that was a really clear priority for recommendation. We'd seen in the first exercise that getting consumers to buy products built to last was fundamental to many of those behaviours, and that given all of the challenges with businesses actually doing that voluntarily, this is the kind of thing where we actually need government regulation in order to create that level playing field to enable businesses to provide these products for consumers to buy. We also identified a number of other priorities. You can go through and see priorities for different stakeholders. So we had government priority. We actually had a priority for advocacy organisations came up, one around organisational consumers, particularly around procurement, as well as, for example, retailers providing buyback and take-back schemes. And in the roadmap, we actually present a system influence score of all of the 130 behaviours. And you can see in purple the top. I think that might be the top 20 behaviours there. An important thing here, just to clarify, is that behaviours that have a score of 0 doesn't mean they don't have any impact. It just means they don't have relative reach throughout the system compared to all the other behaviours. So it definitely doesn't mean that the lighter grey behaviours are not important. But when we were just thinking about how can we intervene to get the maximum amount of system influence, these aren't the places for that particular goal. And so we have the roadmap available online. the first 5 pages just really set out those behaviour change priorities. So if what you're interested in is what can you encourage individual or organisational consumers to do, the information that you need is in those first 5 pages. If you're interested in that broader systems change, we then present that information in kind of the following 5 pages. And then we have in the appendix everything we've learned about those 8 core behaviours in terms of the specifics that different people need to do, as well as some of the drivers and barriers that can actually come up for some of those behaviours. So the final thing around the behavioural systems map is that this is actually something that we've produced and put out publicly because we want other people to be able to make use of it. And fundamentally, behavioural system mapping has a very basic process. You need to identify the actors and the things that you want them to do. What are the behaviours? And then you just need to understand what are the connections between those behaviours, which behaviours enable other behaviours, which behaviours might undermine or constrain other behaviours. But just to basically put your behaviours down and start to articulate what are the relationships between them. And it is as simple and as complex as that. I'll pause there. I'll hand over to Ryan, and then we'll come back to this interactive activity.
Great. Thanks very much, Jen. And I do recommend anyone to go and have a look at the research report. There's, where you can really dig into the data. So yeah, very exciting. So what I'm going to talk about today is the actions, the high impact actions that Planet Ark is enabling. Okay. So I'm also going to talk about how we communicate using behavior change principles that work on an individual level, as well as using audience or business archetype models on an organizational level. Also, be talking a little bit about a couple of case studies of businesses that are enabling high impact action in organizations. So the first example that I'm just showing here is the Knowledge Hub on the ACE Hub. We do like our hubs at Planet Ark. So this has a whole lot of information from all areas of the circular economy, from an industry level to policy, metrics, etc. The second hub is the Reuse Hub, and while the ACE Hub's for the most part aimed at businesses and government, the Reuse Hub is aimed at individuals. So it has information on it around information on charity stores, community programs, online marketplaces that individuals can access to enable that high impact action of borrowing, reusing. But as we know in behavior change science, information alone is not enough to change behavior, but it is necessary. So I'll take you through a couple of examples using social media that Planet Ark uses to reach our audience. But there are some key considerations to take on when we're talking about social media. Firstly, the vanity metrics of social media, so reach and engagement, they aren't necessarily reliable for measuring action and behavior change. But what they can do is provide insights into what actually grabs people's attention and then motivates them to find out more. And they're really two of the key barriers to changing behavior. So hopefully the colors here grab your attention. So this is an example of a Facebook post where we're looking to encourage sourcing items secondhand. Now we've used an image with fluoro colors. We've got images of recognizable faces to attract attention. We're also using humor. And yeah, that image obviously stands out from the crowd. In the caption, we've got the statement around who knows what gems you could find at your local charity store. What's your favorite secondhand find? So those who or what and what statements tend to spark an emotional response. And what it's also doing here is activating the value of that sense of community. So we're using emotion and values. We're also providing convenience by providing a link to recycling near you and further information. The second example was some A/B testing of two different ads using tiles with the objective of gaining web traffic. Now, we base this methodology on some of the behaviour change trials that we help support BehaviourWorks on in their work with councils around New South Wales and Victoria. But what I'll point out here is that what the difference is between these two posts. So we're using the same caption, the same text. However, the one on the left, A, is instructional, where we're saying check the URL before chucking your packaging. And on the right is a gamification message. Would you have guessed this? It's the same image and it's the same call to action to click on learn more. So what were the results? So on basically every metric, B won over A. Now, as those in working in social media would know, when you're doing A/B testing, the algorithm actually pushes the ad that's performing better. But when you look at learn more clicks per 1,000 reach, you'll see that B still is outperforming A. And so this conclusion that aligns with some of the BehaviourWorks trials is that gamification attracts more attention and motivates learning more than those instructional posts. So in terms of enabling action in organisations, those of you who were in the last ACE Hub webinar would have seen the presentation on the Circularity in Australian Business report. So what we did in the call to action of that report was to explore how we can be more effective in engaging and in our collaboration strategies. And it's all about knowing who and the values of your audience. In this case, we're using the this adoption curve or the diffusion of innovations model. And this is used to show how, why, and at what rate new ideas spread. The chasm there, it's where marketing and education often loses momentum in those innovative products and ideas, and in this case, circular economy thinking. So each of the businesses or the audiences in those groups, so the innovators versus the early majority, they all have different characteristics. They have different motivations and drivers. Therefore, to be most effective, you'll need different engagement strategies. And the report goes into that a little bit further. Through our business recycling campaign, and whilst, this is not a high impact action necessarily, the behaviour change principles that we communicate about obviously apply to other actions. But we have a section there on behaviour change tips for the workplace where communicating to colleagues to take up certain actions through using behaviour change science is provided. We're also conducting research to understand the journey of SMEs when recycling, as well as those higher R strategies of reducing, reusing, repairing. So look out for that later on in the year. Onto a couple of the case studies now. Now, these are case studies of B2B businesses that enable high impact action. In this case, borrowing or renting items. So CHG Meridian, they design technology, finance, and end-to-end solutions for IT, healthcare, and industrial equipment. Being a product as a service business model, they take on the ownership risks, including that end-of-life disposal. And you can see there that they've got some great achievements there. 96% of leased IT devices returned in 2022. 76% of materials from old equipment are being used in new products, and they've saved 35% of carbon emissions in the assets they lease. Green Share. So this is a case study that's supporting or enabling sourcing items secondhand. They promote a circular economy for furniture by repurposing secondhand furniture from businesses and then directing them to not-for-profits. And they have reused over 322,000 kilograms of commercial furniture. 15,000 items have gone to 200 not-for-profit or community organisations. And that's an example of product life extension. The power of procurement. So by adopting circular procurement policies, and that's businesses and government, it can help create demand for a circular economy. And this is work that the ACE Hub Procurement Working Group is in the space at the moment. Demand can influence pricing, obviously, but it can also influence the availability of raw materials, innovation and sustainability, and even entire value chains. So procurement is really critical to the circular economy transition. I'll be passing it on now back to Nicole. So I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Jenny. Oh my goodness, there's so much packed into there. I had allocated a couple of minutes to do some summaries, but I think we might press on with our interactive activity. A couple of quick things, though, I think, Jenny, as I was writing down some notes as you were speaking, really important, as you said, that products are built to last, and there's always that challenge in this current sort of fast-moving consumption arena that we live in, that products are not necessarily designed to last. I think that's a really important thing that we need to consider as a community, as a society. And I think also you mentioned, how do we get people to adopt the practice of using pre-loved or secondhand as a thing? I mean, many people do it, but how can we encourage that behaviour as the norm rather than a sporadic use of those products? I'm going to leave it there, though, because we are running a little bit behind time. So with this little activity, what we are going to do is I'm going to pass to Jen. She's going to introduce her map again. But we've got a little activity that we'd love you to be a part of. So maybe, Jenny, I might pass back to you, and you can introduce the relevant information that we need to participate in this activity.
Thanks, Nicole. And this actually speaks to a couple of questions that we've already got from the participants about how does the work actually apply to certain sectors or certain actors. And so we obviously have the roadmap document there that you can go and read what we learnt about the system from our research. But as I said, we've provided this map so that it can also be used by others to do their own thinking and planning and investigating. So our map in Kumu is actually publicly available, and Kumu has this function called forking, which actually allows you to take a version of the map that we have produced and create your own version that is actually owned by you and that you can edit and change and do what you like. So if I'm clever, I'm going to be able to show us in sorry. Yes, here we go. I'm going to be able to show us in Kumu what this looks like. So this is the map in Kumu. And you can see, you know, there's a lot going on in this map. What we have is kind of the overall goal, which is reducing the material footprint. We have our 8 core behaviours that I introduced here. And then we have all the different actors and their different behaviours here. You can see on the side here, we've got retailers, producers, designers, government, we've got advocacy organisations, we've got service providers, and all of the relationships between these. And you can go in and you can play, you can zoom in to kind of see what these different behaviours are. But what you can also do is come over to the map and say you want to fork this project. And what that does is actually create your own version of the map, which I've done. And we've chosen today to take a particular perspective, which is let's say that what we actually want is we want organisations to procure more circular products and services. So I've added that into the map. I've deleted the bottom half, which was around how you use products, and I'm really focusing on how you buy products. And I've elevated here our organisational consumer behaviours, and I'm just going to delete, while we're looking, our kind of personal behaviours. And you can see that when I do that, what it does is it actually, I can't see my button, sorry. It actually removes some of the complexity from the map. And we can see here which behaviours are actually related to organisational consumption from our research. But as I mentioned, we didn't actually get to delve too deeply down into organisations as consumers because our stakeholders weren't that clear. So what we're going to do in this activity is we're actually going to try and source from you guys, our participants, a few ideas about the different behaviours that are needed by actors across the system in order to enable organisations to procure more circular products and services. So Nicole is going to go through a process of inviting you to answer this question and give me some input, and I'm going to show you how we add it into the map.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Just to say as well, I love Kumu. Kumu is awesome. If you haven't done any kind of mapping in Kumu, get connected to it. It's a really fun, very visual. If you're a visual person like I am, it's brilliant at really showcasing what the opportunities are. So Roisin's going to put a question for you. There she goes in the chat. So the question is, who needs to do what in order for us to have organisations procure more circular products and services? So who needs to do what? So if we think about who are the actors and what do they need to do, we'd love you to pop your responses to this in the Q&A. So it's a little bit different to how we would do this if the chat was enabled. But if you could put your responses in the Q&A, we've probably got time for maybe sort of 5 different who needs to do what that Jenny can then add to the map and show you how this might work and connect with the extensive research that BehaviourWorks has done over the last 3 years. So maybe to get kicking. So again, the question is, who needs to do what in order for us to have organisations procure more circular products and services? Now, Jenny, we mentioned one of the questions from our attendees today was talking about how can certifying bodies be part of this? And so how, if we're saying that certification is one thing that is needed in order for us to achieve our goal of more organisations procuring circular, how would that look? What would that look like on your map?
Yeah, that's right. So the first thing you could do is actually go and see, do we already have that in our map? And I know that we actually already have a behaviour here of third parties provide testing and certification for products. Okay. But perhaps what we've heard from you, Nicole, is that we know that in order for organisations to actually, say, prioritise durability in procurement, they need to know that they're going to find products that are actually tested and so or certified. And so what we can do is we can actually draw an arrow from this behaviour over here, and we can say that third parties providing testing influences or enables governments to actually prioritise these criteria. Now, if there were multiple steps, maybe third parties provide testing, businesses actually get their products certified, they promote the certification of their products, and then consumers can do it. There might be multiple steps in this relationship that you might want to spell out one at a time, but you basically build this relationship between these behaviours. And we'll come back to why this is important shortly. So that's one good behaviour.
So another one that has been suggested is that government needs to provide financial and regulatory incentives for manufacturers to create circular products.
Excellent. Okay, so that's a really good point. One of the behaviours that we absolutely have on here is that producers need to make items that are built to last. That's one aspect of circular products.
Yeah. And
we do have a number of government behaviours, but we don't have a direct funding behaviour. So we could put in here a new element or a new behaviour, which is governments. Could you say the funding part? Sorry, Nicole. Governments.
Yep, governments to provide financial and regulatory, but financial incentives for manufacturers to create circular products.
And let's just still stick with the built to last, just because I know where it is.
Yep.
So we add that in here. We can say that this is actually a government behaviour by coming over here and saying this is government, and that will say it's red. And then we know that that's going to support producers making items built to last.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to actually make connection from the incentive to the producer, and then we're going to make sure that our producer, if I can get it to, why is it not? Yes, so we can see that our producer here, if we hover over it, we can see there's already a line from producers making items built to last to our government.
Yeah.
Sorry, to our organisational procurers.
Great, thank you. We've got quite a few actually that are talking about this need to actually have more durable products. So I think that's answered a lot of those responses well. We've got a really interesting one from Anouk. We need to have executive management to be supportive of buying circular products. Is that already shown on your map?
No. So one of the things we didn't get to do is go down into a level of detail. So we can add a new behaviour here. They're called elements in Kumu. So we've got organisation executive supports, and what was it? Sorry, Nicole, supports.
Hang on. Now I'm scrolling. We've got lots of.
Let's just say the inclusion of circular.
We need to have executive management to be very supportive of circular products and services.
Okay, so we can add that in here, and this is the organisational behaviour. So we can
could be both actually, but yeah, let's say organisation.
I don't know why that's gone unreadable, but we know what it is, and now we can say that's going to support all of our consumer. All of our organisational procurement behaviours. So we can actually draw these lines through all of these behaviours.
Great.
And I'll just, while you're getting the next one, I'll see if I can make this readable. Here we go.
Yeah, we've got about 40 actually, Jen. So we might actually task you with, if you've got time, to perhaps add some of these to our map that we can have a look at it once we're all finished. I think, there's quite a number of comments that we need to actually have role models. So government needs to be a role model in procuring circular, which I think is one of the ones that you might have already.
Yeah, so that's very similar. So we have governments mandate their own internal circular procurement policies, but this is where actually spelling out the chain of behaviours can be really useful. So what we could do is we could create another behaviour here that says governments promote their own circular procurement as a case study / model for other organisations to follow. As I said, this is not my area, but we'll kind of make some educated guesses here. Yeah. And so in order for governments to do that, they first need to have their own policies, and then they promote those policies. And then what we would do, this is where it can get a little bit messy, we can start actually bringing through, and let's say again that they were actually doing built to last. So we can actually put that connection in into this, which is our built to last one. That might be enough, Nicole, to show how this will be helpful. So one of the things that Kumu does is it allows you to create really complex, messy, possibly overwhelming maps of the relationships between all these different parts of the system. But it also allows you to actually focus in on particular parts of the system. And so if I can get this to focus, which it just wasn't doing before, but let's see if I can get it to focus. Okay, so here's our goal. And what we had was the 4 specific behaviours that met that goal. So we had organisational consumers prioritise renting, that they prioritise second-hand in procurement, they prioritise built to last, so durability, extended warranty and repairability, and they prioritise circular materials. So these are the 4 behaviours that are needed to meet our goal. And what we can do is we can start to work back into the system and say, well, which behaviours are directly related to achieving these? And we can see, okay, here's an important one, which is organisation executives are supportive. We can see that we need our producers and or our importers to be making available products that are built to last. We've got our certification. We can be seeing that actually having just general promotion of these particular strategies is important. And we've got our sort of government. So you can start to see what's directly related to these different behaviours. But you can continue in expanding it and saying, what else might be helpful? And this is where, as we said, this idea about where is it useful to intervene, we can see that this seems to be a little bit of a core piece of the behaviour. And it's actually what you said, Nicole, which is producers make items built to last. We found that in our work. But you can see then which part of the system that you want to engage in. And maybe you've decided that actually this is where you want to focus. And so if I can, my focus isn't working, but I could come and actually focus in here and say, okay, this is what I want to happen. I'm actually going to ignore procurement for a second because I've determined that this is actually the fundamental piece. So now I'm going to focus in on this part of the map and see what is actually required. And you can go out and see, all the different things. And again, you can see, oh, it comes back to, at this particular case, what our research suggests is that what's really going to get the transformation in this particular case is mandatory minimum standards. So you can add different elements, you can play with different connections, but you can also then work out which parts do you want to prioritise. And what's really useful about that is this difference between behaviour change and systems change, is that traditional behaviour change approaches tend to say who needs to do what, so let's focus on them. But a systems change thing says that it's not always the right, it's not always going to be the most effective or the most efficient place to focus. Sometimes you need to focus further upstream to create those enabling conditions or perhaps those encouraging or influencing actions that then will flow through to the ultimate change that you want.
It's such a, as you said, it could be quite scary if you're not familiar and not comfortable with this level of detail, but I think it's a wonderful tool. We've only got a few minutes left, and I know that we've got quite a number of responses in our Q&A, as I mentioned, from what things might be able to be plotted on the map. But I guess from your perspective, Jenny, who is this map most useful for?
So the report itself, we think, is really useful for any stakeholder to actually go and see what role are they trying to play and what does the roadmap suggest is a really valuable place for them to start with that system influence perspective. And so, as I said, we had all of those different behaviours prioritised for each different stakeholder group. For the map itself, we find that this is going to be particularly valuable for those organisations who are trying to intervene externally beyond their own intervention, beyond their own organisation, to see what do they want to try and change. Do they want to focus on a particular organisation or a particular industry or sector? Do they want to focus on, a particular aspect like procurement? One of the questions was about FMCG. You could rebuild this map and tailor it to a particular sector and see what the metrics, which I won't go into, but which you can use the metrics in Kumu built in here to get some of that prioritisation. So it's really built for people who want to see where to intervene and how to intervene.
Yeah, fantastic. And Ryan, from the perspective of your work within behaviour change, how do you see this wonderful tool supporting the work that we're doing at Planet Ark?
Yeah, I mean, it's so valuable because it emphasizes the high priority actions where we can help enable through various means, through our social media, through our working groups, because can only do so much, and there's only so much time that we have. So this type of tool, really makes our work more effective, I believe.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that we will be sharing the links to both the map and the tool. I'm just scrolling through as I'm talking to you, looking at what are the comments questions over and above what we've already got for the comments for the map. So there was a question about whether what's your opinion on mandatory frameworks and policies like EPR, product stewardship? How do they factor into your map and the research you've done, Jenny?
I think we've always considered government regulation and legislation to be an important part of the behaviour change suite of tools or levers. But the interesting thing that this really demonstrated is which parts of the system does it suggest that can change without regulation, and which parts might need regulation and why. And the example of producers and retailers making products built to last is a really good example of when the market is not going to kind of naturally or sort of sporadically move towards the outcome that we want. And that's because there's not enough products available for us to run a behaviour change campaign to consumers to say, go and buy products. There's no point because they won't be able to find them. But there's also therefore not enough consumers who are aware that this is a really important thing to do, to be calling for that demand from businesses, for businesses to say, to be comfortable that there is enough demand to make the change. But there's also an unlevel playing field between businesses who are making profits by selling the cheapest or the most number of things possible, and a business who's trying to shift to a model that actually requires selling less. And where you've got either the lack of kind of driver because neither of the audiences are willing to move, or you've got this unlevel playing field, what we find is kind of this inertia. It's not just going to voluntarily happen according to what our stakeholders have set us. And so that's where mandatory things can come in, where you actually need to provide an external impetus or mandate. And the other place typically is when you need the change to happen very fast. So some of these things will naturally happen over time, and they can be supported through things like incentives, like financial funding incentives, case studies and models that governments can produce to kind of support the change. But it takes a really long time, as Ryan was talking about, to diffuse through all of the different actors in the system. And so when you need that change to happen quickly, typically you're going to need government direct intervention through some sort of legislative or regulatory process.
Yeah, thank you. One thing, I guess, with COVID, we saw that government policy can, in fact, work quite quickly when it needs to, depending on what the urgency and priority of the focus is. But yeah, we are pretty much at time. We've had a wonderful question from now. Let me just find that comment again. From Cecilia. She wanted to know, could we publish all the comments so that we can learn from each other? That's a great idea, Cecilia. We'll love to do that. We'll be sending out next week, we'll be sending out the recording link to YouTube. Well, actually, we could probably post the two links to Jenny's map and the report. But we'll put them again in the email for next week. And we'll share some of the comments that you've all been putting into the Q&A for the mapping exercise. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us. And particularly, obviously, thanks for Jenny and for Ryan for presenting today and hearing from your work and your research, which is so invaluable as we get the hardest task done, I think, which is about behaviour change. We've got upcoming events from the ACE Hub talking about circular economy, both locally and globally. Of course, you can visit our website, acehub.org.au, subscribe to our newsletter, or if you're not already, join the ACE Hub portal, which is kind of like LinkedIn, but for circular economy. We'll have some questions at the end of this webinar. So when you click off, we'd really appreciate your responses. it really helps us guide next steps. And we've got some exciting projects coming on stream this year, so that will help inspire some further action from both us and hopefully you. So thank you again for our ASUB team for coordinating this event. There are so many hands that make this happen. And if you're interested in the next iteration of our study tour series, which is on the 23rd of April, look out for the registration link for that as well. But thank you, and all the best to all of you on your own journeys towards circularity. Please let us know how we can help you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. So thanks again, Jenny and Ryan. See you.
Sure.